Hands behind your back.
All right, we're routine with flight 702. Verify my badge.
You're impersonating flight crew.
Record this.
Control, I need a unit at the crew corridor. Possible badge fraud.
The first cuff clicked like a mistake. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean little snap that didn't belong in an airport at 6:18 a.m. Captain Malcolm Reed stood under fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired, his pilot's jacket still zipped, his overnight bag hanging from one hand. He wasn't running, he wasn't yelling, he wasn't even arguing anymore. He was doing that thing people do when they realize logic isn't the currency in the room. He was going quiet. "Hands behind your back," the officer said again, voice tight, as if repeating it made it more lawful. Malcolm stared past him, down the corridor where gate agents and ramp workers moved like ghosts on the other side of the glass. A baggage cart beeped somewhere outside. A distant announcement crackled and died. He took a slow breath. "I work here," he said, calm enough to sound like he was explaining it to a child. "I'm the pilot on Flight 702. I'm on duty." The officer's nameplate read, Cross, 24, maybe 25, fresh haircut, 2 clean boots, the kind of new that still believed every situation could be solved with a louder command. Officer Evan Cross didn't look at Malcolm's airline badge. He looked at Malcolm, and he decided what Malcolm was. "You're impersonating flight crew," Cross said. "I've seen it." Malcolm blinked once. Then, with the patience of someone who had spent years reading checklists in emergencies, he said, "Call my chief pilot, call ops, call the gate, run my employee number. I'm not going anywhere, but I am not being detained like this." Cross lifted his radio like it was a gavel. "Control, I need a unit at the crew corridor," he said. "Possible badge fraud, male subject refusing commands." Malcolm turned his head slightly, eyes finding the small black body camera on Cross's chest. "Good," he said, almost to the camera. "Record this." Because a few months later, when the city wrote a settlement check for $2.2 million, they didn't do it for a misunderstanding. They did it because the footage made the truth too expensive to deny. Rewind, not to the confrontation, to the morning that set it up. Harbor City International wasn't awake yet, not really. It was that half-life airports live in before sunrise, floors freshly mopped, coffee stands just opening, the air smelling faintly of disinfectant and jet fuel. Outside, the sky was the color of steel. Inside, everything hummed. Conveyors, ventilation, the quiet mechanical confidence of a place designed to move thousands of people without asking any one person to be important. Malcolm Reed parked in the employee lot at 5:42 a.m. He sat for a second with his hands on the steering wheel. Not because he was late, because he liked the pause, the moment before the day became a schedule. He had been flying commercially for 17 years. He'd logged enough hours to measure his life in tutte, time zones. He'd landed in fog so thick you could feel it. He'd listened to engines that didn't sound right and made decisions fast enough to keep everyone alive. He'd earned the kind of calm that doesn't come from confidence. It comes from repetition. And still, every morning, there was the quiet ritual of putting on the uniform. Because the uniform wasn't just fabric, it was expectation. Today's expectation was Flight 702, a packed early departure to the East Coast with a tight turnback. 2 legs, 2 briefings, 2 chances to do everything perfectly. Malcolm swung his overnight bag over his shoulder and walked toward the employee entrance. The badge scanner flashed green. The door released. He stepped into the staff corridor where everyone moved with purpose, and no one made eye contact long enough to start a conversation. This was the backstage of aviation. Pilots in uniforms, caterers with carts, ramp workers with reflective vests, maintenance, crews in grease-stained coveralls. And at the far end of the corridor, the place that always tightened the air a little, Airport Police, a small glass-fronted office with 2 officers visible behind it, one older, one younger. The younger one looked up as Malcolm approached, and that's the moment, in hindsight, where the story really began. Because the younger officer didn't just notice Malcolm, he tracked him. Officer Evan Cross had been at Harbor City International for 3 months. He wasn't a city beat cop, he was airport police, trained for a strange blend of public safety, security theater, and bureaucratic enforcement. He had transferred from a small suburban department where the biggest events were fender benders and high school football games. Now he worked in a place where the stakes felt global, even when nothing was happening. And Cross wanted to prove something. He wanted to be the guy who caught the bad actor, the guy who didn't miss the threat, the guy who took security seriously. That hunger can be useful. It can also be dangerous, because in an airport, fear has a badge. And when fear speaks, people listen, especially rookies. 3 days earlier, airport security had circulated an internal alert. Not dramatic, just a memo. A reminder that badge fraud happens, that people sometimes borrow uniforms, that some impersonators try to use crew corridors to avoid screening. The memo had a blurry screenshot attached, grainy CCTV of a man in a jacket with a lanyard. No clear face, no clear name. Just the warning, be vigilant. Cross read it like it was a mission, and like a lot of people who are new to power, he quietly translated be vigilant into be suspicious. Malcolm made it past the police office without incident. He took the elevator down to the operations level. He checked in with flight ops. He reviewed the weather. He met his first officer, young, competent, slightly nervous the way every new first officer is when paired with a captain who's seen everything. They talked through fuel, alternates, turbulence reports, the kind of conversation that sounds boring until you realize every word is a safety net. At 6:05, Malcolm started toward the crew corridor that led to the gates. He wasn't going through passenger security. He never did. Flight crew had their own path, a controlled access hallway that required a valid badge and a uniform. The hallway was quiet, a long stretch of off-white walls, a few security cameras, a turnstile, and at the end, a door that opened into the terminal behind the gates. Malcolm approached. He scanned his badge. The turnstile clicked, and then, just as he stepped through, he heard a voice behind him. "Hey, stop right there." He turned. Officer Cross was walking toward him fast, not running, but moving like someone who already believed he was right. "Let me see that badge," Cross said. Malcolm held it up, still clipped to his jacket. Cross didn't take it. He didn't scan it. He didn't ask a question like, "Captain Reed, correct?" He asked the kind of question that assumes guilt. "Where'd you get that?" Malcolm's eyebrows lifted. "I'm sorry?" "The badge," Cross said. "Where'd you get it?" Malcolm kept his voice level. "I'm a pilot. I work for Horizon Atlantic. It's my badge." Cross's eyes flicked to Malcolm's face, then to his uniform, then back again. "Take it off," he said. Malcolm's patience thinned slightly. "Officer, I'm on duty. If you need to verify my credentials, scan it. Call ops. They're expecting me." Cross stepped closer. The distance between them shrank to that uncomfortable zone where it becomes clear the issue isn't security, it's dominance. "Take it off," Cross repeated. "Now." Malcolm looked down the corridor. 2 ramp workers had paused at the far end. A catering employee slowed. Her cart. Someone glanced, then looked away, the way people do when they don't want to be involved. Malcolm's calm didn't come from submission. It came from experience. He'd learned long ago that escalating with armed authority inside an airport was how you lose, even when you're right. So he tried a different approach. He did what professionals do. He offered options. "Officer," he said, "I will stand right here while you verify. But I'm not removing my credentials. That's not procedure. Cross's jaw tightened, and something in his tone shifted from inspection to accusation. You're refusing a lawful command, he said. Malcolm's eyes narrowed slightly. What's the lawful basis for detaining flight crew on a controlled access path when their badge scan's green? Cross didn't answer the question. He didn't need to. In his mind, the question itself was defiance. He reached for Malcolm's badge. Malcolm pulled back, instinctive, protective, not aggressive. That movement in Cross's head became justification. Don't touch me, Cross snapped. I didn't touch you, Malcolm said. You reached for my badge. I'm telling you, verify it, right now. Cross's hand went to his belt, not the gun, the cuffs, and Malcolm felt the air change. Because once cuffs appear, it's no longer about checking, it's about control. What happens next is why this story became a case. Cross could have taken Malcolm's badge and scanned it at the reader 5 feet away. He could have radioed ops. He could have asked for a supervisor. Instead, he made a decision that would be replayed in legal briefs, internal reports, and the kind of late-night TV commentary that turns human humiliation into entertainment. He told Malcolm to turn around. Malcolm didn't move. Are you serious right now? Malcolm asked, voice still low, still measured. I am the pilot on a flight that departs in under an hour. Cross stepped in closer. You're not a pilot, he said. Malcolm stared at him. That sentence landed harder than the accusation, not because it threatened his job, because it threatened his identity, because it wasn't based on evidence, it was based on perception. Malcolm looked at the body camera. Then he did the thing people do when they sense the system will try to rewrite what happened. He narrated it. For the record, he said, my badge scanned. I'm in uniform. I am requesting you verify through operations. You are choosing not to. Cross's face tightened as if Malcolm had insulted him. I'm not here to debate, Cross said. Turn around. A pause, a long one, and then Malcolm said, call your supervisor. Cross's radio came up. His voice went clipped. Control, I need a unit at crew corridor. Possible badge fraud. Subject is refusing commands. And that's how an officer turned a pilot into a subject. That's how the story began to separate from reality. The second officer arrived within minutes, an older officer named Raymond Holt. Holt took one look at Malcolm's uniform, his bag, his badge, the calm stance, and you could see the calculation happen, not suspicion, recognition. He'd seen Malcolm before. Most airport cops do. They see the same crew members every week. They see the same faces. They learn who belongs. Holt's eyes flicked to Cross. What's going on? Holt asked. Cross answered too fast. Badge fraud. He's refusing to surrender his credentials. Holt looked back at Malcolm. Captain, Malcolm said immediately. Horizon Atlantic. I'm on Flight 702. This officer is refusing to verify my badge and is trying to detain me. Holt's brow furrowed. This is the moment that could have ended everything. Because Holt could have said, scan the badge. He could have corrected the rookie. He could have de-escalated. And for a second, it looked like that's exactly what he was going to do. He glanced at Cross's body camera. Then he glanced at the corridor cameras. Then he made a choice that, later, would be described in the case as the moment the institution protected itself. Give me your ID, Holt said to Malcolm. Malcolm held up his badge again. Scan it. I said give me your ID, Holt repeated. Malcolm's voice sharpened just a hair. I'm not handing my credentials to an officer who is already treating me like a criminal. Verify it here, right now. Cross seized the moment. See? He said, refusing. Holt's shoulders rose and fell in a controlled breath, and then, obedience. Malcolm was walked down the corridor in cuffs, past employees who stared and then looked away, past a cleaning crew that paused mid-sweep, past a security camera that captured the humiliation in crisp, unblinking angles. Someone whispered, "Is that a pilot?" Another voice answered, "Looks like it." And somewhere above them, Flight 702's boarding clock kept moving. A machine that didn't care about injustice, just time. At 6:40, a supervisor finally arrived, Sergeant Marisol Vega. Vega was the kind of supervisor who didn't waste words. She walked in, saw Malcolm in cuffs, saw the uniform, and her eyes narrowed in the way that says, "I already know this is going to be paperwork." "What happened?" she asked. Cross launched into his narrative. Possible impersonation, badge fraud. He refused to surrender credentials. We detained for verification. Vega didn't look at Cross. She looked at Malcolm. "Captain?" she asked. Malcolm held up his cuffed hands slightly. "Captain Malcolm Reed," he said. "My badge scanned green. I asked him to verify through ops. He refused. Then he cuffed me." Vega's jaw tightened. She turned to Holt. "Did you scan the badge?" Holt hesitated. "We attempted to obtain ID. Subject refused." Vega cut him off. "I didn't ask what you attempted." Then she looked at Cross. "Scan it." Cross's face flushed. "Sergeant, scan it," Vega repeated, flat. Cross walked the badge to the reader. Beep, green. He did it again like the first one might have been a fluke. Beep, green. Vega stared at him for a long second. Then she turned back to Malcolm. "Captain Reed," she said, voice softer now, "I'm going to remove the cuffs." Malcolm didn't thank her. He didn't smile. He simply said, "I need to get to my aircraft. Now." Vega nodded once, but it was already too late, because while the cuffs were coming off, the damage had already spread. Flight operations had noticed the missing captain. The gate had called. The first officer had called. A dispatcher had started making contingency plans. The airline's chief pilot, an older man who had flown with Malcolm years ago, was already on his way, boots hitting tile like a countdown. And the airport, like every big system, did what big systems do when something goes wrong. It started, trying to protect itself. Vega pulled Malcolm aside, away from the corridor. She spoke in the language of bureaucracy. "Captain, I need you to understand we're addressing a security concern. There was an alert." Malcolm held up a hand. "Sergeant," he said, "I don't need a speech. I need you to answer one question." Vega paused. "Why did they refuse to verify before cuffing me?" Vega's mouth tightened, because she knew, and because the reason didn't sound like policy. It sounded like pride. "I'll handle it," she said. Malcolm stared at her. "Handle it how?" he asked. Vega didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. Malcolm made the flight, barely. He reached the cockpit with minutes to spare, heart still steady because he was trained to keep it that way. But something had changed. The cockpit door closed, the checklist began, and Malcolm's hands that had guided thousands of landings, shook just slightly as he adjusted a knob, not from fear of flying, from the shock of being treated like he didn't belong in his own workplace. He flew anyway, because that's what professionals do. They carry their trauma quietly until the job is done. The story might have ended there in a different world. A bad morning, an apology, a memo. But in this world, there was video, body camera, hallway cameras, airport security feeds, and there were witnesses. Dozens of employees who saw a black pilot in uniform in handcuffs. That image doesn't stay quiet. Not anymore. Within days, Malcolm filed a formal complaint, not because he wanted revenge, because he wanted a record. He understood something about institutions. If you don't force them to write what happened, they'll write what they can survive. His complaint described unlawful detention, humiliation, interference with employment, and, most importantly, a failure to follow basic verification procedures. He asked for the footage. He asked for the incident report. He asked for the names, and he asked for something that, at first, seemed impossible: accountability. The airport police department responded the way departments often do. They called it a security misunderstanding. They said officers acted out of an abundance of caution. They promised additional training, and they assumed it would fade. It didn't, because the footage told a different story. The footage showed Malcolm offering verification options. The footage showed Cross refusing to scan the badge. The footage showed Holt choosing escalation. The footage showed Cross saying, "You should have complied." That wasn't caution. That was punishment. And when punishment becomes the motive, the law becomes vulnerable. Here's the twist that shifted this case from a bad encounter to a major settlement. During the internal review, it emerged that Cross had already been warned, not for misconduct, for judgment. A training officer had noted in his file that Cross escalates quickly and interprets non-compliance as hostility. Another note described him as overly confident in threat identification. In other words, he was exactly the kind of rookie who needed supervision. And yet, on that morning, he was positioned in a corridor that required finesse, a place where verification should be routine, a place where a mistake could become a disaster. That detail mattered, because it suggested the city hadn't just hired a rookie, it had failed to manage him. And in civil cases, failure to supervise is a doorway. The second twist was quieter but sharper. The badge readers in the crew corridor had a known issue. Sometimes they lagged, sometimes they beeped green, even when the back-end system was delayed. There was a protocol for that, a simple one. If there's doubt, you call operations. You contact the airline. You verify through the roster. You do not default to handcuffs. But Cross and Holt didn't follow that protocol. They skipped it, and the reason they skipped it wasn't because they didn't know. It was because they didn't want to. When the city's lawyers reviewed the footage, they saw the problem immediately. This wasn't a complex legal puzzle. It was a simple chain. A badge scanned. An officer didn't believe it. A pilot offered verification. An officer refused. A supervisor arrived too late, and a man was humiliated at his workplace. The legal question became unavoidable. What was the reasonable basis for detention? And if the answer was a hunch, the case was already leaning toward settlement. Public pressure accelerated everything. A ramp worker leaked a hallway clip, not the bodycam, just a security feed, a pilot in uniform, hands cuffed behind his back, walking like a suspect. The clip spread fast. People didn't need context. They understood the image. And if you've ever watched something go viral, you know how it changes the air. Suddenly, the department's careful language sounded like spin. Suddenly, abundance of caution sounded like cover. Suddenly, the question wasn't just what happened. It was how often it happens to people without Malcolm's title, without his uniform, without his access to legal counsel. If you've ever worked inside a big system, an airline, a hospital, a courthouse, you know there's an unspoken hierarchy of credibility. Some people are assumed to belong. Some people are assumed to be a problem. And credibility isn't always tied to evidence. It's tied to expectation. On that morning, Malcolm Reed didn't fit Officer Cross's expectation. So evidence didn't matter. That's the ugly math. The lawsuit came next, filed in federal court. It alleged unlawful seizure, civil rights violations, discriminatory enforcement, emotional distress, economic harm, and it named the city, not just the mark officers, because the goal wasn't only to punish an individual, it was to expose a structure that allowed a rookie to turn suspicion into cuffs without immediate correction. During discovery, more details surfaced. The internal memo about badge fraud was real, but it was vague, and that vagueness created a dangerous kind of freedom. freedom for officers to interpret, freedom for officers to project, freedom for bias to hide inside vigilance. The plaintiff's legal team argued that the memo became a permission slip, not to verify, to assume. There was a deposition where Cross was asked a simple question. What specific fact made you believe Captain Reed was impersonating crew? Cross paused. You could almost hear the mental scramble. He said something about behavior, something about tone, something about refusal to comply. But when pressed, when asked what objective evidence he had, Cross had nothing, and in a case like this, nothing is heavy, because nothing is what the camera shows. The city tried to narrow the story. They tried to frame it as a mistake corrected quickly. Cuffs on, cuffs off, no jail, no injury. But the plaintiff's attorney pointed out the real harm. The harm isn't only physical, it's reputational, it's psychological. It's the knowledge that your own workplace can turn on you. It's the way that knowledge follows you into every corridor after. At a community forum, months later, Malcolm spoke once. He didn't perform outrage, he performed control. He stood at a microphone in a room full of people and said, "I'm not here because I hate police. I'm here because I know what procedures are." He paused. "Flying is procedure," he continued. "We don't do things on gut feeling. We verify, we cross-check. We use checklists because people die when you let pride make decisions." Then he looked around the room. And that morning, he said, pride made the decision. If you've ever wondered why stories like this hit people so hard, it's because they expose the gap between what the system claims to be, fair, evidence-based, professional, and what it becomes when a person with power decides their certainty is enough. Negotiations moved quietly after that, not because the city suddenly cared, because the risk became too high. A jury watching the footage, a jury hearing, "You should have complied," a jury seeing an older officer join the rookie instead of correcting him. Cities don't like juries when cameras exist. Juries have a way of believing what they see. The settlement figure, $2.2 million, arrived without fanfare. No dramatic confession, no public apology that matched the harm, just the standard language. Without admission of wrongdoing. Resolving claims, moving forward, but money is never just money. It's an acknowledgement of risk, and risk in this context means the city believed it could lose in court, lose in public, lose in a way that forced permanent changes. Part of the settlement included policy adjustments. Again, they didn't call them reforms. They called them updated procedures. But the substance mattered. Mandatory badge scanning before detention, immediate supervisor review for any crew corridor stop, a clear requirement to contact airline operations for verification, Bodycam review standards focused on escalation language, and a new training module, quietly added, on bias in security enforcement. Not because the city suddenly discovered morality, because the case made bias expensive. Officer Cross didn't become a household name. He didn't need to. He became something more common, a cautionary example. Within the department, he was reassigned, taken off crew corridor duty, placed under closer supervision. Whether he resigned later or stayed on in a different role became part of the usual administrative fog. But the case didn't hinge on his future. It hinged on his decision in the present. The decision to treat a professional as a suspect because the professional didn't perform submission. And there's another layer here that's easy to miss. Airports are built around trust, not the sentimental kind. Operational trust. You trust that the person with a badge belongs. You trust that the person in a uniform has been vetted. You trust that procedures exist for a reason. When an officer breaks that trust on a whim, it doesn't only harm the person in cuffs, it contaminates the system. Because after that morning, every pilot who heard the story walked a little differently down that corridor. Every crew member wondered if their badge would be believed. Every employee understood something that passengers rarely see. Security isn't just about threats. It's about how power behaves when it thinks nobody important is watching. While you're listening to this and thinking, well, at least it ended quickly, ask yourself what quickly means when you're the one in cuffs. 10 minutes can be a lifetime when dignity is on the floor. 10 minutes can change how you hear your own footsteps. 10 minutes can turn an airport, your workplace, into a place you don't fully trust. Malcolm didn't stop flying. He didn't quit. He didn't vanish, because he refused to let someone else's assumption rewrite his life. But he did change. He started documenting more. He started walking with a little more awareness. He started noticing who watched him and who didn't. And he started doing something that says everything about how these stories echo. He started checking where the cameras were, not because he wanted attention, because he wanted protection. In the months after the settlement, Harbor City International kept moving. Flights departed, announcements echoed, coffee stands served, commuters. The public forgot. Most people do. But in the employee corridors, the ones passengers never see, the story stayed alive. It became a reminder, a warning, a lesson about how quickly professionalism can be ignored when bias dresses itself as security. And in a way, the most chilling detail of the whole case wasn't the cuffs. It was the simplicity, a badge scan, a refusal to verify, a decision to escalate. Because if a pilot, someone whose name is on the schedule, whose face is known, whose uniform is a symbol of trust, can be turned into a suspect on a whim. What does that say about the people who don't have that uniform, who don't have a chief pilot a phone call away, who don't have an entire roster proving they belong? This story began with a click, a cuff closing around a wrist in a corridor meant for professionals, and it ended with a number, $2.2 million. But the number is not the point. The point is the record, the footage, the proof that the system didn't malfunction. It operated exactly the way it can operate when a person with authority decides certainty is enough. Next time you're in an airport, standing under the bright lights, listening to the distant roar of engines, remember there are two airports, the one passengers see and the one employees live in, a network of corridors and doors and scanners and quiet power. On a cold morning before sunrise, in that hidden airport, a rookie decided a black pilot didn't belong, and for a few minutes the system agreed, until cameras made the truth impossible to ignore, until policy had to catch up, until the city paid not for a misunderstanding, but for the cost of letting pride wear the mask of security.